Hello, everyone. I'm Rosa Linda Román. I go by Rosa Linda, and I am talking to you from my new boat. Well, new to us. And I'm in Spain, near Barcelona. I'm not going to tell you the name of the boat yet because I'm waiting. I'm a bit superstitious about these things, and I'm waiting till our daughter Ahava arrives in about a month. Actually, less than a month, a few weeks now, thankfully. And we're going to do like a formal blessing with the new name and all of that with our whole crew. So I'm not going to share that name with you publicly yet, although some of you who know me probably could figure it out. But anyway, for now, I will share, like I do this time every week, a chapter from my book, Losing Sight of the Shore, How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family. I read a chapter of this, my sailing memoir, once a week, and it's becoming more challenging because there's a massive time difference between here and mountain time, where I normally am in New Mexico. Now it's about 8 hours ahead, which actually wouldn't be a big deal, except here in Spain, everybody does everything later, and 8 o'clock p.m. is dinner time here. So we will probably be at dinner. So I'm actually recording this about an hour before this actual broadcast. So apologies for not being live, but got to make it work one way or the other. So let me get my glasses and let me read this chapter to you and see how it goes. All right. Again, this is Losing Sight of the Shore, chapter 23, Kid Entertainment. You would think that the very nature of being on a boat would mean you never again have to hear your children utter the words, "I'm bored." But ask anyone that has had to wait out a blow in an anchorage or spent long stretches of time on sparsely populated islands with their kids, and they will tell you theirs are no different than their land-based counterparts in this complaining department. I have seen blogs by fellow cruisers who have only one kid, and I marvel at how the parents don't lose their minds. You are away from internet and your ability to use the occasional electronic babysitter, and your one child has no playmates. From talking to these brave souls, I gather that their kids are more creative and self-entertaining than mine are, and you will never hear them complain about this. But for me, I am super grateful that my kids had each other, plus a dog on board to entertain them. Yes, they did own iPads that we had DVD players and we had DVD players and TVs on board. But my kids will tell you that I am the mean mommy who never let them veg out on tech on such a beautiful day. If we were at an anchorage, I would make them go for a swim or a kayak or to take a paddleboard around the boat if they started complaining to me about being bored. I felt that the tech should generally be reserved for crossings when everyone was too seasick to want to look at the thing anyway. The worst bouts of boredom for my kids happened when we were at a marina for any length of time. At an anchorage, you were usually in relatively shallow water surrounded by other cruisers who would help keep an eye on your kids and your dog, and you were generally close enough to shore that they could swim to safety if needed. At a marina, it was a very different story. Yes, there might be other liveaboards, but they weren't always the kind that liked kids or noise, and the layout of the docks were often not very kid-friendly. In order to get to the showers or the laundry area, you might have to pass by a bunch of drunk guys on a weekend party boat or the public restrooms where the homeless folks like to sleep. As for getting some much needed exercise, even though we were on the water and surrounded by water, it is generally not a place for swimming. This is partly due to the fuel dock where there are inevitably spills, but also because people work on their boats and many of those chemicals end up in the water. In other words, I made my kids stay on the boat unless I was with them, which made for some very bored kids. The good news is that this sparked some very creative games. The bad news is this sparked some very awful fights. Still, I limited the tech time and worked to keep my reactions to their reactions in check. While I was busy working on my business or developing some really great systems for chores and responsibilities, at least I thought they were great, the kids were smart enough to steer clear and entertain themselves. Of the many options they came up with, 3 stand out in my mind as the best ways my kids passed the time when they were bored: reading, playing superpowers, and gung gung swinging. I know many people will be aghast at what I'm about to say next, but reading was a bit of a problem, and still is, because my kids are voracious readers, and Nathan and I are not. That meant the girls blew through every book we had on board and went out in search of more. Living at a marina, the first place they could always find books was in the laundry room or community lounge, which cruisers often use as a book exchange. The way that works is if you finish a book, you leave that on a shelf and then take a different book which a previous cruiser had left behind. The problem was that the overwhelming majority of cruisers are grown-ups, so the overwhelming majority of books in these book exchanges were of the grown-up variety and often wildly inappropriate for my preteens. That didn't stop them from wanting to read them, which again put me squarely back in the mean mommy category. Another problem with books is that they weigh a lot and take up space, neither of which is a desirable characteristic when you live on a boat. Rather than carrying books everywhere, many cruisers bring along Kindles, iPads, or other tablets, which they load up with books for their kids. Our problem is that our kids don't just love reading, they love books. Realizing this and not wanting to spend a fortune on a book that they would be done with in a few days, we always sought out libraries wherever we went. U.S. libraries are generally amazing in the sense that they are well stocked and run like a well-oiled machine. This is great for finding the books you want as long as you are staying in one place for a while. Most local libraries will only let residents check out their materials. The frequently moving nature of the liveaboard life can make that difficult. But because of Ahava's gymnastics training, we found ourselves at Riviera Beach Marina for many months, which gave us a local address and the chance to get library cards. Like clockwork, we would take a trip to the library every week and return to the Dawn Treader with a mountain of books to fill some of those boring hours. This insatiable craving for more and more books began long before we moved on to the Dawn Treader. Back when we were living on Hakuna Matata, even though the girls were just 2 and 4 at the time, the search for books was a major pastime. Gratefully, we found little libraries, even on some of the tiniest islands. Since many of their visitors were transient, they often had ways for book lovers to buy, borrow, or swap books without needing a permanent local address. Some of these libraries were run by volunteers from the cruising community, and some were run by local retirees. When managed well, these little libraries felt like discovering gold at the end of the rainbow for my kids. The problem was that several of these libraries had woefully inconsistent hours. On more than one occasion, I had to comfort a crying child after we had dinghied over to shore during the library's posted hours, only to discover it closed because the volunteer hadn't shown up that day. I know they say beggars can't be choosers, but try explaining that to a heartbroken kid who just blasted through the entire Harry Potter series. Despite the challenges, the kids somehow always managed to find new books on a budget, which was a good thing since we were boat schooling and always in need of new learning materials. Also, because we were boat schooling, which at times looked more like unschooling, we saw every situation as a learning opportunity. Nathan talked physics, mechanics, and fluid dynamics with and around the kids. He gave them math problems over breakfast, and their journalist communication-focused mommy corrected their grammar and taught them to fact check and enunciate. Their doctor engineer daddy corrected them when they made inaccurate assumptions about how a material might react in a given situation, and he constantly had them calculating the speed or mass of a thing. It wasn't long before the kids started incorporating this learning into their creative play. My favorite of these games was called Superpowers. From inside the cabin, the game of Superpowers sounded suspiciously like a bickering herd of elephants stomping around on the upper deck. If you dared to step foot on top, you might not have any chance of understanding what was actually going on. It took several times of asking before the kids let me in on the game. For starters, it involved slips of paper with superpowers and superhuman abilities written on them. Each child would get to pick a certain number of superpowers in a very complicated process that I never fully understood. Was superpower trading and fighting about what each power actually allowed you to do or not do. But in the end, they all settled on their batch of superpowers for that particular round and then ran around the boat using their powers in an epic battle between good and evil. The catch was that the superpowers couldn't defy the laws of physics, loosely interpreted with some suspension of disbelief sprinkled in, of course. In the middle of it all, you might hear someone call, "Pause, pause, pause. I said pause." And then a super child would come in and ask, "Mommy, if I used laser eyes on Samuel's skin, he would melt, right?" This was usually followed quickly by another kid yelling, "I told you I was using my anti-laser shield." From what I can tell, this was their idea of fun. This game was much more intricate and creative than I am giving them credit for. They wanted to make sure their powers were viable in the real world, and they were constantly inventing new combinations and placing themselves in more and more complicated scenarios. As their mom, I loved it. Not so much for the echoing elephant herd sounds that were overpowering the entire cabin, but for the way they were working together, negotiating, and using their bodies, minds, and creativity in fascinating ways. Basically, for the 7 months we were stationary at the Riviera Beach Marina, our kids' days were a revolving door of reading, eating, superpowers, scrubbing the deck, picking up dog poop, and more reading, with an occasional out-of-town visitor to shake things up. Then we discovered both the yoga trapeze and the gung gung swing, and their superpower game was taken to a whole new level. The yoga trapeze was my birthday present that first year on the Dawn Treader. It looks like a silk hammock with carabiners on either end, plus handles of various lengths on 2 separate carabiners. The Yoga Trapeze Company markets it to grown-ups for hanging upside down to alleviate aches and pains, especially in your back. But the kids quickly fell in love with it, and I rarely got a chance to use it. On the Dawn Treader, the yoga trapeze fit nicely on 2 hooks on the boom, the big horizontal pole which secures the main sail, making the perfect little spot for aerial yoga. I tried it a few times, got super dizzy, and felt like all the blood had drained out of my body, collecting in my very red face. From what I understand, this is pretty normal, and you have to build up a tolerance to this blood drain feeling by flipping yourself upside down a little bit more each day. But I never got the chance to see if this was true once the kids discovered it made the perfect onboard jungle gym. Over and over again, they used the yoga trapeze to flip and do tricks. They soon decided that the handles were perfect for converting into swings too, putting their full body weight on them, a job they were definitely not designed for. Clearly, they needed something that was made for this purpose. As luck would have it, another parent posted a video in the Kids for Sale Facebook group, that's SAIL, showing a kid having the time of his life swinging over the water on something called a gung gung swing. The minute I saw that, I knew we had to have one. The gung gung swing comes from IKEA and is a well-built forest green swing with carabiners on each end. In the store, it hangs harmlessly from an imaginary kid's bedroom ceiling where they sit in it quietly reading a book. In our liveaboard life, the gung gung swing was something else entirely. It was an instrument for joyous, wild movement on an otherwise boring day. Hung from the downhaul rope off of the mast, it became a roller coaster and an exercise apparatus all in one. It was also a German Shepherd exerciser as she ran from bow to stern hundreds of times, trying to catch the airborne child swinging out over the water. Combined with the yoga trapeze, the gung gung swing gave the kids two new tools in their superpowers game and became their favorite pastime at marinas and on long passages. Sitting in the swings, legs against the hull, they looked like Spider-Man running along the side of the Dawn Treader. They skimmed the waves both upside down and right side up, gaining strength and confidence along the way. There is no way for me to capture in words what this swing did for a bunch of boat kids with time on their hands. Sorry about that. Over the years, my kids introduced dozens of other kids and their grown-ups to the joys of the gung gung swing. I was one of those grown-ups who learned quickly that this was a serious leg workout, the equivalent of doing lots of squats, but one that left you giggling like a little girl. My favorite thing was witnessing a generally timid child or reserved parent turn fearless as they ran along the side of the boat. And because we gifted several other boats their own gung gung swings, we know the joyous swinging lives on, even as we are no longer a live-aboard family. If reading this makes you feel a twinge of jealousy, let me bring it all back to reality. Even with all of the reading, boat schooling, superpowers, sailing, exploring, flipping, and swinging going on, there were plenty of days that the kids would fit right in with their landlocked peers with the age-old refrain we parents all dread. Mommy, Daddy, there's nothing to do. I'm so bored. And that was chapter 23, Kid Entertainment, Losing Sight of the Shore. I hope you enjoyed that. It makes me smile so much because so much has happened since I wrote this book. And now here we are. I've just been on the boat for a week now. In fact, just under a week, because I did the live stream last week while we were on the road driving to the boat. And it's been a whirlwind. I'm happy to report we got Nala here. We have figured out a lot of the logistics. I am not happy to report that the air conditioning is broken and the heat of a Mediterranean summer is pretty challenging. And we also are having some kind of engine trouble. And finally, some kind of navigation issue. The other thing that's interesting as I read this chapter is the whole thing was about kid entertainment. And I was like, oh, we didn't have internet. Well, that was true on the previous boats, but on this boat, we actually have Starlink. I sent that here to the Med on a big mega yacht that was willing to take some of our stuff. So we now have Starlink, which is why I am able to share this with you. And the other thing that struck me as I was reading the chapter is this is a motor cat. It does not have a sail, so there is no big, tall mast. And so Samuel is very sad that we don't have a gung gung swing to swing back and forth along the side of the boat. So we have a lot to explore, a lot to learn. I'm sure we'll find new ways to enjoy. We are at a marina right now outside of Barcelona, and the water is just as disgusting as I described in that chapter. So there's no swimming, but luckily we're not far from a beach, so we can walk over and the kids can swim there. If you are interested in following our journey of this new boat, and I'll share some of the stuff from previous boats, you can check out my Substack. That is rosalindaromán.substack.com, and you can find a link here in the show notes. All right, that is it from the Med, from Spain. Muchas gracias. We're practicing our Spanish a lot, and I appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching. I'm Rosa Linda Román.